Welcome back to the Kino Cave, everybody, and today the Kinospective is back, and we're continuing our ride through the MCU Infinity Saga with Iron Man 2, directed by Jon Favreau. Before I jump into this Kinospective, guys, make sure that you leave this video a like if you end up liking it, comment down below what you think of Iron Man 2, and subscribe for more from the Kinospective. So, I have always loved Iron Man 2. This is the first MCU movie that I saw in the cinema. I distinctly fucking remember it. I'd seen Iron Man 1,000 times. I loved it. I wanted to be Tony Stark so bad, as you guys know from my previous video on Iron Man. And so when I saw that Iron Man 2 was out in cinemas, I begged my dad to take me to see it, and we both ended up really, really loving it. And I didn't see any of the flaws or any of the stuff that I'm sure we'll get into in the review section of this video, but at the time, Iron Man 2 was the shit, because, you know what? There was a black and grey Iron Man suit with a big gun on his back on the poster, and that was enough for me when I was 8 years old. So, as usual, guys, I'm going to be getting into some of the making of information on Iron Man 2, take you on a little retrospective journey, and then I'll get into my review in the second half of the video. Let's start off with how Iron Man 2 began. So this is when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was starting to get into gear. They realized that this has a lot of potential now. Iron Man had done really well, and we have that little tease with Nick Fury at the end. So why don't we keep that going? Let's start cooking an Avengers crossover team-up movie. And of course, because Iron Man 1 made a lot of money, we have to kick into gear with a second movie and give our filmmakers less time and more work to do it. So from day one, the mood from Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau seemed to be that Iron Man was fresh, which it was. For 2008, we literally had two superhero movies that both far exceeded their budgets, where there was a press conference where the main character was to reveal his secret identity to the world. And one of those films was The Dark Knight, where Batman doesn't go through with it because he's fucking Batman and he needs to have his secret identity to keep true to the character. But Iron Man was like, fuck it, I am Iron Man, breaking the mold of your typical superhero movie. So how do you keep it fresh 2 years later with Iron Man 2? So let's kick off by saying I feel really bad for Jon Favreau at this point in his life. He's clearly stressed the entire time during the making of this film. You can just see the cogs constantly turning in his head and constantly trying to hold about 1,000 ideas in his head at the same time. He is stressing because he still wants to make a movie that lives up to the passion and energy of the first Iron Man movie. But now he has way less time to do it, and there are way more studio notes coming from above, because you're not an underdog anymore. You're in the big leagues now, whether you like it or not, and you're going to have to listen to some of these big money guys. However, it didn't deter Jon Favreau straight away. He immediately kicked into gear by getting ahead of some of the previs and some of the visual effects. So he gathered together the animators, editors, stunt performers, mocap performers, and the cinematographer Matthew Libatique to come together and work out a lot of these previs segments of the film, like the fight between Tony and Rhodey in the Stark Mansion. All of these special effects heavy scenes that you're going to have to create in a computer because real people just can't do that shit. And Libatique is on record on the behind the scenes as saying it's a better method of communication, which is true. I mean, you look at the way these movies are done nowadays, and here's a list of shots that you need to make up in a computer, and you have absolutely no basis for how you're going to make them, but you're going to have to make them anyway. And by the way, the film's out next week, so if you could get it done by then that'd be great. But that's not how Jon Favreau wants to do it. He wants to have everything incorporated. He wants to have our animators, our editors, our cinematographer, our performers all in communication with each other to make these shots as good as they can possibly be. And as I'll get into in the review section, this pays off immensely. One thing I really loved about watching the behind the scenes of this film is Favreau and Downey Jr. and a lot of these returning cast and crew members, there is now a rapport and there is now a sort of relationship built from the first Iron Man. And so we're kind of laughing and joking around, we're doing a bit of improving, you know, we're having fun on this one because now we all know each other and we're all having a good time. which is exemplified in the speech that Robert Downey Jr. gives right before they start filming their first scene in the courthouse. So, as I just mentioned, they started doing a lot more of the improv stuff, especially in that courthouse scene towards the beginning of the film. If you look at the behind the scenes, a lot of it is we have our loose idea of the script, like with the first Iron Man, and we have to talk about this, this, and this, so just improv your way through it, make some jokes, make it funny, make it energetic. That absolutely worked on the first Iron Man movie because we have our heart and we have our passion still, and we are working out these kind of scenes on the fly as we're going, but we're starting to see some of the problems with the MCU coming from this. You can see the seeds of it as early as Iron Man 2, where we're kind of riffing and we're kind of making it up as we go along, but is that really making for effective storytelling, effective use of comedy coming from the characters, or are we just doing like an SNL improv kind of thing? So let's talk about Mickey Rourke. Bit of a touchy subject. Guy has landed himself in some hot water as of late, and I definitely think that he's an odd bloke, but I don't really know much about him. I think he's a good actor. I think he's incredible in this film. But outside of that, let's just say I'd be cautious of him. And the cast and crew were apparently very cautious of Mickey Rourke. He seems to be a bit of a dangerous, scary kind of presence on set. Nobody really wants to stand up to him as much. I don't think necessarily because things would get violent or anything like that, but he seems to be coming in with a very intense energy, and it seems to be a bit of a kind of volatile vibe whenever they're on set together. But he does seem to be a nice enough guy in these behind the scenes interviews, and he is collaborating with the cast and crew very well, and even the people creating the Whiplash costume. Again, just people seem to be very cautious of him when in these interviews. For example, him having a pet bird, which he affectionately calls his Bud in the film, and the constantly breaking out into Russian every once in a while. That's all Rourke's idea. That's something that he brought to Ivan, along with a lot of other things that he brought to Ivan that he just personally wanted to include. And it seems like Jon Favreau is a bit cautious about a lot of these decisions, but it seems that he kind of didn't want to ruffle too many feathers, funnily enough, with Mickey Rourke, so he kind of begrudgingly lets him play it however he wants to play it, with a bird and random just bursts of Russian. So from day one, Rourke also did not want to wear a full prosthetic Iron Man suit. He didn't think that worked for the character, and he didn't think that would work for his performance. Clearly, the studio heads had differing ideas, considering how the movie ends, but he wanted to wear something practical, something that kind of shows off his skin and shows off his performance a bit more, which is completely fair. And I think it's one of the worst parts about the first Iron Man movie, even though I love it. It is just two Iron Mans fighting at the end, and if you just do that again, then it kind of feels cheap and boring because you've done it before. Oh wait, the ending of Iron Man 2. And for the action scenes, Rourke trained with actual bull whips to get the feeling of having these whips, because these whips are practical for a lot of it, and so he has to know how to use them without whipping himself on the ass. But there is a second villain of Iron Man 2, one that I feel did not get the shake that he maybe deserved it back in the day, but people have really come around on Justin Hammer, played by Sam Rockwell, and this blew my fucking mind in the behind the scenes interviews when Jon Favreau and Sam Rockwell were talking. But Sam Rockwell got this part in Iron Man 2 because he had worked with Jon Favreau on a little movie called G-Force. Now, I don't know if any of you guys remember this movie, but this is a fucking movie we got right here. Like, this is cinema on a different level than what we're used to with these new-fangled MCU movies. This is a movie with a bunch of computer-animated guinea pigs and they're secret agents. G-Force is a fucking wild ride, guys, if you haven't seen it, and that movie just became infinitely funnier because it's directly responsible for Justin Hammer's character in Iron Man 2. Anyway, back to talking about improv. Sam Rockwell found it hard to keep up with Robert Downey Jr.'s kind of wit and improv skills on set. He's not really that kind of coded guy who's used to kind of improvising and thinking on the fly. So you did find it very hard to keep up with Robert Downey Jr., who clearly knows this character at this point, and I don't think any of us can deny with the films that have come out since that, you know, Robert Downey Jr. knows this particular version of Tony Stark better than anybody ever could. Any writer or any director. Robert Downey Jr. seems to have just been living Tony Stark for years at this point. Obviously, kind of broke out of that after Avengers Endgame, went on did Oppenheimer and that Doctor Dolittle movie, which looks awful. However, Rockwell was allowed to import his own ideas onto Justin Hammer as well, such as the fact that he just eats sweets all the time, which is something I never even realized. And now I feel stupid for not realizing it because it took Sam Rockwell literally telling me through the television that, yeah, Justin Hammer just eats sweets, like, constantly. He's constantly eating lollipops or, like, little kind of snacks and sweet treats. In the scene with Ivan, he eats dessert. Like, he doesn't actually eat, like, any actual, I don't want to say proper food. Like he even says it. I think he likes to eat the dessert first or something before he gets his like main course. That's just such a weird character quirk that I kind of love, and I love that it was the actor that brought that to this character because as well this character is childish. He's someone who kind of looks up to Tony, I think, and he clearly wants to be a version of Tony Stark. He's just a big fucking baby who's really stupid and can't do anything for himself. He's just a rich kid. He's not a genius like Tony Stark, and he's never had the experience in the cave that Tony Stark had that made him into the person that he is today. So, yeah, he's just this weird, whiny child who can't do anything for himself. And of course, that whiny child would just eat sugar. More on Sam Rockwell's maybe issues with playing Justin Hammer is Justin Theroux, who is a very famous writer and actor, and he's big in the filmmaking world. He wrote the weapons testing scene, is it a weapon demonstration scene, the night before. And Sam Rockwell had to have the lines fed to him through an earpiece. And if you watch this scene, there's a lot of technical gun jargon being thrown around in this scene. And it's very fast, and a lot of fast talking, and a lot of just talking. You can see Sam Rockwell getting a bit frustrated when he's not getting these lines right because he read them minutes before cameras started rolling. So I can certainly empathize with Sam Rockwell's feeling that, like the great Jeff Bridges once said, they had no script, man. Another new actor who became an MCU veteran after this movie is Scarlett Johansson. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about with Scarlett Johansson throughout all of these movies, I think. I think, unfortunately, her and the character of Natasha Romanoff never really got the fair shake that maybe she deserved. But either way, when she came on board to this movie, she was very eager to kind of do her own stunts and do a lot of the more physically demanding stuff. There's stuff that I feel like I need to mention when it comes to Scarlett Johansson and Black Widow in this film, and I'm sure I'll touch on it in later films as well, but let's just say we had a long way to go from 2010 in terms of how female superheroes were represented in movies, and a lot of you can see some footage of like costume test fittings, and Scarlett Johansson is standing there in a costume, and Jon Favreau and the costume designer whose name escapes me, but it'll be here. They're just kind of like looking her up and down and like kind of pointing at different parts of her body and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, and it just seems like a very uncomfortable situation to be in. And I feel like when you're in a superhero costume, that stuff is kind of lessened because the focus is more on the costume rather than the body that's in it. And I mean, most of the men in this movie just wear suits, so I guess there's not much to really be said there. And of course, then you see how Black Widow is portrayed in the film through some of the camera shots and some of the structure of some of these scenes, and it's very body focused rather than character focused. Honestly, people much smarter than me and much more connected to this type of experience than me have already talked about this, so I would suggest seeking them out and listening to them rather than myself. I'm not gonna dive deep into the horrific sexism that occurs in the film industry and specifically in action movies. Onto the practical Iron Man suits. So I always thought that these were also created by Stan Winston Studios, considering it's a pretty perfect translation from the first film into these films, but it was actually done by Legacy Effects. I'm sure this is a company that doesn't exist anymore, but either way, I'll look into it again and see what this company is up to now. So they wanted to innovate a little bit from the previous Iron Man suits. For example, removing the legs because you hardly see them ever and they're really uncomfortable and difficult for the actors to move around in. And we're going to get into this a lot whenever Iron Man shows up in one of these movies, but there is a reluctance later on in these films to have anybody wear a practical Iron Man costume because it's big and heavy and needs to be 3D printed and crafted by hand. So we just CGI the whole thing. I think there's a middle ground to be found. I think it's smart to, remove the legs of the suit because you hardly ever see them in close up or need to see them that much, and it's just making things harder for the stunt performer, the mocap performer, or Robert Downey Jr. himself to wear properly. However, when it comes to the chest, the arms, the hands, and the helmet, I would say that those parts are pretty essential. So they made the suits lighter, a bit more mobile, and easier to take on and off, which is, again, smart. We, only have a couple of years to get this film out. We gotta be able to get in and out of these suits as much as possible, and we can't have our actors dying in these suits every 5 minutes because they ran around for 12 minutes in a giant hunk of fucking metal. And of course, for the disassembled Mark II suit, which they called the autopsy suit, I think they called it, that is actually parts from the Mark II suit from the first Iron Man for continuity's sake. A lot of the kind of under parts where you can see the circuitry and the metal skeleton and stuff, that had to be created for this. But a lot of the outside shells of the suit were just taken straight from Iron Man 1. Now to get on to more of the VFX heavy scenes. So for the sequence in Monaco, they had it planned about 6 months in advance so that when they got there, and you can only film there for however many days, you can just knock it out straight away because you have it all planned out and all worked out ahead of time. Which again is smart, and it feels like it should be obvious, but you'd be surprised. So this is quite interesting. For a lot of the VFX heavy sequence where you need to have a lot of computer generated characters moving around in a scene at once, they created a digital environment, and this is something that I have very little understanding of, so bear with me. So they computer generated this environment where you have your mocap performers in a room together, and Matthew Libatique had what they called a digital camera, which looks kind of like an iPad with it looks like an iPad sitting in a Mario Kart controller. And this acts as a camera. The digital environment is loaded into this camera. There'll be pictures, so you don't need to imagine any of this, because I feel like I'm not going to do a great job of explaining it. Matthew Libatique can then move the camera around the mocap actors and see the vague environment that they'll be in behind them. And the advantage of this, obviously, is that Libatique can create these shots as if they're in an actual environment and the mocap performers are in the Iron Man suits. And you can create these shots for real. So then when you go into the editing bay or the computer lab and you go to finish generating these scenes, you have the shots constructed. And then all that's left to do then is touch up the visual effects, make the Iron Man suits look real, make the digital background fleshed out and real looking. And I thought this was just a fascinating process. Rather than giving an animator nothing and making them create these shots out of nothing, which often leads to then these shots looking terrible, you have your cinematographer filming the digital scene as if it's real. And then all that's left to do in the VFX department is to just make it look real. You have the shot, just do the VFX work to make it look genuine. I thought that was a really fascinating process, and I think it leads to the movie looking fucking incredible, which I will get to. So for the Stark versus Rhodey fight in the mansion, they used two methods to work out this fight scene. They filmed a lot of it with practical Iron Man suits so that you could see how the light would hit certain parts of the suit, how it would interact with the environment when it comes to dust and wet. I mean, there's a lot that happens in this scene, and the characters get covered in dust and soot and wetness and stuff like that. So they filmed a lot of it with the practical suit so that you could see how different environments interact with it. But then they also filmed it entirely with the mocap performers for, more complex moves and stuff like that. And then that leads to the suits looking very real and very genuine. A lot of the time, I couldn't tell whether or not they were wearing a practical Iron Man suit or it was completely VFX, because they have gone in and tested it both ways so that you can see exactly what an Iron Man suit is supposed to look like in a specific environment and performing a specific move. And they talk about this more in the behind the scenes, but they wanted to bridge the gap between a completely digital Iron Man and a completely practical Iron Man. They're constantly cutting between them and never letting the audience focus on the CGI, bad, fake looking Iron Man. We always want to be going between and bridging that gap between the practical suit and the VFX suit so that the audience never loses the reality of the scene, which I think is fantastic. Like, what a great way of making a fully CGI superhero. So just a couple of miscellaneous notes at the end before we get into our review. The Stark Expo was inspired by the 1964 World's Fair, which Jon Favreau grew up around the kind of site of that World's Fair. So he had a lot of experience with it. He obviously would have known a lot of people who would have been at it. He has that kind of special connection to it, and he wanted to bring that in. And they also got Richard Sherman to write the Stark Expo jingle, which you can listen to on Spotify. It's on the soundtrack for the film, and he is a veteran of writing jingles, and specifically in that era as well, of that 1950s and 1960s Americana. So yeah, that's great. Again, effort that you wouldn't put in nowadays into these blockbusters. Another thing, just a miscellaneous thing that they did, the Jarvis dialogue, they actually used a lot of it to fill in plot problems and solve plot problems and fill in context. This is a very busy movie, and this is a very heavy movie in terms of its plot, because we're doing basically two movies at once. So when you have to cut out a scene, just throw in some Jarvis dialogue to fill in the context of what that scene was going to have. Which is... it's a good workaround, I'll give it that. And my final miscellaneous note on the behind the scenes is that Jon Favreau says at one point in the behind the scenes that he said that the only people close to him are the creatures he created. Which is something I literally said in the Iron Man 1 video before I knew that he said this at all. So... I got you, Jon Favreau. I understood it. Sorry, I'm just really proud that I managed to figure that out, and then Jon Favreau confirmed it for me. So that is it for the behind-the-scenes information on Iron Man 2. I feel like that was a lot, and it was very VFX heavy. But I would absolutely recommend going and looking at these yourself, because it's fascinating, and a lot of it is quite fun to look at. But without further ado, what do I think now of the first MCU movie I saw in the cinema? Iron Man 2 is rad as hell, man. This movie is fucking awesome still. How many years later? 16 years later, this movie is still awesome. So much fun and so cool, and I love watching it. It moves at a fucking clip, but the action scenes are incredible. The dialogue is hilarious. All the characters are really fun to watch. The Stark versus Rhodey fight reminded me of being a kid and like playing Iron Man with my friends or with my action figures or whatever, and just like playing pretend, and it's just smashing action figures together. The at that moment at the end when Iron Man and Rhodey fight off the drones and the helmets flip down and you get that great sound effect of the helmets flipping down, I audibly out loud just went, fuck yeah. So for all the messiness that's in this film, I can't not love Iron Man 2. However, I can't just sing this movie's praises for the next 20 minutes or however long I end up doing it. I have to talk about, realistically, the stuff in Iron Man 2 that doesn't work. So, however much I love it, and however much I love the themes in this movie of holding a mirror up to Tony Stark with Justin Hammer and Ivan Vanko and focusing on legacy and Tony's father, this movie is messy as hell. And this movie is unfortunately buried in exposition and universe setup. Now, I ran into the same problem as I did with Iron Man 1 when talking about Iron Man 2. I think this is a film that's been talked about a lot. I was safe with the Incredible Hulk video because that's the forgotten MCU movie. That's one that people tend not to talk about that much. so I could kind of review it in a more traditional way and just kind of look at it at face value. And to be fair, that film is presented to you at face value. So, but with Iron Man 2, a lot of people have talked about Iron Man 2. A lot of people have analysed Iron Man 2. A lot of people have talked about the messiness and the exposition and setting up a world and, you know, setting up the Avengers movies. So I try to think of, again, like with Iron Man 1, what do I bring to an Iron Man 2 review? And so, like with Iron Man 1, I'm going to bring 3 case studies, 3 scenes from this film that I just love. And if there were more scenes in the film that were like these 3 scenes, then I think it would have made for a better film overall. So, here are 3 case studies for Iron Man 2. The scene between Tony and Vanko in the prison. So when Tony enters this scene, he immediately jumps into talking about tech, talking about the technology that Vanko used against him, because that's his only way of connecting with anybody. Once again, the machines that he created are his closest friends. So of course, when he talks to a new person, when he's trying to get them to talk to him in a more genuine way, of course he reaches out in the only way he can, tech talk. Note as well that this is how he connected with Yinsen in the first film as well. He only starts to get to know Yinsen when he proves to be someone who's on the same level of intelligence as Tony. However, Vanko immediately gets more personal, and as this happens, the camera pushes in, gets closer to these characters' faces, because Tony Stark's all about keeping his distance, but Vanko wants to get under his skin. However, Tony brushes this off. He wants to get back to the tech talk because that's where he's more comfortable. He wants to talk about how Vanko created his arc reactor. We then, of course, get that incredible line read from Mickey Rourke. If you can make God bleed, then people will cease to believe in him. He's already attacked Tony's weakest point, which is his pride and the arc reactor, and proving him wrong, not just to himself, but to the public. Tony is once again on the defensive and brushes off that comment from Vanko. And so the camera moves out again as Tony goes on the defensive and brushes off what Vanko is saying. And right at the end of the scene, Vanko strikes Tony literally in his heart by revealing that he knows about the palladium poisoning. It is insane that this is one of 3 interactions that Tony has with Vanko in this film. They should have had way more scenes like this. Scenes where the film slows down and where these characters get to know each other. I think Vanko is such an interesting character, but he's not given enough with Tony in this film. Again, most of Vanko's scenes are there for exposition reasons and get ways of getting around the plot. The next case study, Tony versus Rhodey. This is the only true attempt from the film at covering the demon in a bottle storyline, which they clearly were referencing and wanted to do more of an adaptation of, but they just couldn't because, again, they were buried in trying to set up the Avengers and buried in plot. So the scene starts off with the party scene. Tony gets drunk in his Iron Man suit, physically and emotionally shielding himself from outside attack. You know, the drink helps him to emotionally cut himself off from people, while the Iron Man suit physically protects him from people. And then Rhodey confronts him wearing the Mark II suit. This is the suit that represented Tony's defiance in the first film, the suit that we felt this feeling of weightlessness as we flew through the air with Tony. And it is now being piloted by his friend who has run out of empathy for him. Tony is literally being attacked by his own defiance, by the burned bridge with his best friend, and by his former self. Which is why at the end of this scene, well, towards the end of it, he screams at himself in his own reflection. He's screaming at the Tony Stark that he has become and the Iron Man that he has become, because it's not the same Iron Man that he was in the first film. Finally, the third case study, Tony's father's movie. Tony lazily goes through his notes as he ignores his father's speech. We can hear it in the background, but he's not interested. It's the same shit that his dad's always pulled. After all, the Howard Stark that's presenting the Stark Expo, the genius philanthropist who was a man of the people, that's not the person that Tony Stark knew. Tony Stark didn't know that Howard Stark. That Howard Stark was a facade. Tony's ears only kick into gear when he hears his father say, "Tony, what are you doing back there?" At this, Tony looks up at the film and sees the father that he actually knew. The father that he grew up with. The cold man who never had any time for him and never wanted to be around him. And then as the film goes on, Tony starts to see a side of his father that he never saw before. An all too familiar side. A man who couldn't stop drinking, a man who started intentionally fucking up the film because he was bored, a man who was just being an asshole to the people around him. This is a very familiar face, but it's not the face of his father, it's his own. But then, he hears his father once again called Tony. He had never heard his father speak his name so softly before. This is all conveyed through Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. And for the very first time, as Howard Stark goes on with his speech about how Tony is his greatest creation, Tony finally sees the father that he always wanted. A father who was proud of him, a father who believed in him, and a father who loved him. And those are my 3 case studies on why I think Iron Man, despite all its flaws, is great. And I think if we had more scenes like these 3, it would have made for a film that even surpassed the first one. So Iron Man 2 cost a whopping $200 million. That's a lot of chunk of change. However, it made $623 million at the box office. So Iron Man 1 proved that these movies can make money, and Iron Man 2 proved that these movies will make money. So let's get ready for an Avengers movie. Iron Man 2 is rushed, messy, cool as hell, and I still love it. So guys, that was my Kinospective on Iron Man 2. I really do hope you enjoyed these videos, guys. I'm having a lot of fun with the MCU Kinospective. It's a different kind of video. It's a bigger, more savage undertaking than I've ever done on this channel before, so I really do hope you're enjoying these, guys, because I'm really enjoying making them. These are some of the videos that I'm most proud of on this channel. So please, if you liked it, give it a like down below. Comment down below what you think of Iron Man 2 and what you thought of this video. And please subscribe, because the Kinospective is not stopping anytime soon. I hope you all have a great day, guys. I'll see you in the movies.